Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling completely drained, like someone just took all your energy and left you exhausted? Or maybe you said yes to something when every part of you wanted to say no, just to avoid feeling guilty or making someone upset. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. Setting boundaries is something so many of us struggle with, yet it's one of the most powerful tools for protecting our mental and emotional well-being. The truth is, boundaries aren't rude, and it's not about pushing people away. It's about protecting your peace. It's about deciding what you will and won't accept, who gets access to your time and energy, and making it clear that your well-being matters. But here's the challenge. Many of us have been conditioned to put other people's comfort above our own, to avoid conflict, and to keep the peace at the expense of ourselves. That can change today. This is part 2 of our 3-part series on emotional self-defense, and today we're looking at how to set boundaries that actually stick. What are the most common types of boundaries and why it's so hard to enforce them? Most importantly, how can you start standing your ground without guilt? Welcome to Self-Defense for Women Live an Empowered Life, the podcast that helps you stay safe, feel strong and take control, physically, emotionally and mentally. I'm Julie Waite and alongside me is self-defense expert Dene Josham, and together we'll break down the psychology of boundary setting and how you can finally start protecting your energy. So let's get into it. So Dene, setting boundaries, where should we start with this subject? Because it's quite a difficult one for people to get their heads around.
I think it's so important to realise you've got to set boundaries, because if you don't set boundaries, people set them for you. So yeah, for me,
people will choose for you, won't they? Then you won't get any say in it.
Yeah, and also I think some of this is a reflection to look at ourselves as well, because I know I've been a people pleaser, and that potentially is from childhood, how I've been conditioned or things that might have happened to me. And looking back to realise how I am like I am, then that helps me with a lot of clarity to how I can change that in a positive way for me and other people around me as well. So, boundary setting for me, you don't have to do this, but if you can name the behaviour and why it makes you feel uncomfortable to yourself, and then if you want to share that with a person, then do that, because communication's massive. And that's where most things break down in miscommunication, or if it's being misinterpreted. So it's that, explaining that and then making sure the other person knows what you mean from what you've said, not what they think you mean.
So that's what you see as step 1 of setting a boundary, is naming what it is and then explaining it to the other person.
Yeah, it's for me, it's naming it to myself as well.
Okay.
Realising within myself first that, that's the behaviour in that person. I'm uncomfortable with that. And then, how do you approach that to the person? Because if somebody's quite defensive or, spins around, throws that as an attack on you, then that can potentially stop us from setting that boundary with that person, because sometimes you know how people are going to react, don't you? Oh, you're accusing me of this. It's like, no, I need to tell you because that's my boundary and I'm not comfortable with it and I want you to know. So, our relationship still is healthy and grows, and we have a better understanding of each other, because you might have misinterpreted what my boundaries were. So at any stage you can set them, and at any stage you can change them. That's a personal thing, isn't it? It's not just set in stone. Maybe there are certain boundaries that's it for everybody and I'm never going to change them. That's fine. But realising that's the flexibility you have yourself to change your boundaries when and where you see fit.
I guess then when you've decided that someone's kind of encroached or crossed over the line, you don't like what they've done, and then you need to talk to them about it. I guess there's not really much other way than you just have to be direct and really clear about what it is. Because I know I have in the past, you try and skirt around things because you're just a bit embarrassed and whatever, but then people don't get it, do they? I think you just have to just be really clear and just say to them, I feel uncomfortable that you have done this or said this, and then tell them specifically what it was, the exact words, and I don't want it to happen again, or I don't want you to talk to me like that or treat me like that or ask me to do that or whatever it is.
Yes, whether that's something they've said or, the other kind of boundaries that you need to set as well, physical ones and all that. I know we're going to look at that in a minute. And I think also it's getting your timing right, because, we're all very busy. I understand, certain people in my life that there's times where there's no point in trying to engage with them because they're very busy or focused on doing something else, whether that's work, family stuff, whatever. So it's like picking your time where you think they're going to be more susceptible to listen to you and understand and not potentially be defensive or try and, flip that round on you. And also coming from the place of, this is about our relationship to keep it healthy, make it healthier. And it's not an attack. And I think that's what we do subconsciously. Maybe somebody says something and we see it as a criticism and an attack. So we go on the defensive or the attack. And it's just trying to make the other person realize you're coming from a good place.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess then you've set your boundary and they may not acknowledge that they've done the thing. A lot of people, certainly if you're dealing with like narcissist or some sort of toxic relationship or someone who's manipulative, they might not even recognize what you're saying. So where do you go from there? If you say, I feel like you've disrespected me because you've done this, I don't want you to do it again. And they say, well, you're being sensitive, or I didn't do that, or I didn't say that, or I didn't mean it like that. Where do you go from there?
Yeah, it's a real trick, isn't it? Because depending on their person, and like I say, if they are a narcissist, then you're never going to get potentially the response you deserve and should have for setting your boundaries. And if you don't get that, then do you know who you're dealing with? Because like I think I said before, if that's a good person, they should respect that. And it's how you deliver it as well. I always try and see it from the other person's point of view personally. So I just want to highlight this. You spoke to me like that, or you did this. Would you be happy if somebody did that to you? And the answer you get is going to tell you a lot for me, because, if it is reasonable and it's your boundary, then the other person would accept that. If they don't, then that just highlights to me again, that person isn't listening to me, isn't bothered about me, potentially doesn't respect me. And okay, well, I can still highlight my boundaries. And if a person, for me, if they say you've misread that, and then it's like, okay, well, just to make things clear, then so we're both clear. This is my boundary. This is what and you can also tell them what you do and what you don't want to happen or for them to do. Again, this is all choice, because it's very difficult depending on who the person is, because it can be an uncomfortable conversation.
Yeah. I think as well, just to stand firm once you have set your boundary, like not to backtrack, not to have to like negotiate it, or it's like it's your choice to say how you feel and how you want it to be treated.
Yeah, definitely.
They can then choose. They will then choose how they react to that, and if they don't react the way that you want them to, you then have to choose how you're going to deal with that person in future. Whether you can distance yourself from them, whether if it's someone in a relationship with, whether you want to continue in the relationship, whether it's someone at work, whether you need to take things down a HR route, whether you can avoid them. It's just trying to think, how can I deal with that person now? I've set my boundary. If they accept it, that's great, problem solved. Yeah. If they don't, you then have to make some quite difficult choices about your interactions with them and kind of how close you're going to be to them going forwards.
Yeah, so reality, isn't it, that you might lose some relationships might change. That's just an unfortunate part of setting your boundaries. And that shouldn't be like that, but it potentially can be, like I've said before about stepping away from people or distancing myself, because like we said, earlier, it's about your inner peace. I say this to the kids. My son laughed at me. It's about your inner peace, Dad, and it is, because that affects the outer side as well, doesn't it? So it's definitely about thinking you might have to step away from people.
Interesting what you said about the inner peace bit. Statistics here, one from Harvard Business Review that says only 38% of people feel comfortable setting strong personal boundaries. One from Mental Health Foundation in the UK, which says poor boundary setting is a leading cause of burnout in relationships and workplaces. And one from Mayo Clinic, which says toxic relationships significantly impact mental health. People who struggle to set emotional boundaries have higher rates of anxiety and depression. And I think that's because if you're saying yes to someone when you want to say no, if you're brushing off digs, mean comments, things that put you down, personal attacks, if you're kind of constantly letting yourself suffer instead of standing up to other people, it weighs down on you and it burdens you. And it's almost like, well, what you're going to suffer either way. So you can either be the one that takes these attacks and that takes the digs and the comments and you know, your time gets used and drained and your energy gets drained and you're suffering in that way. Or you can suffer by thinking, I don't want to have to stand up and set a boundary for myself, but it's going to be uncomfortable. But that to me it's a slightly harder to do in the moment, but longer term, you feel better because you have stood up for yourself. And I think if you don't stand up for yourself, it does wear you down inside.
Massively, doesn't it? It's always, it's kind of like when you said all that, I was thinking, do you know what? We'd rather have an internal battle. Well, not everybody, but we kind of process. Yeah, it's easier to battle within myself than it is to speak my truth and potentially somebody else get offended. And like I always say, if we're more worried about offending somebody else than we are about our personal safety and our inner peace, then that's something for me. I've had to reflect, and I think we all should, because your inner peace is priceless. Nobody's worth that inner peace. So it's easier to battle ourselves than it is to stand in our, worth and set our boundaries physically, emotionally, whatever that is.
Yeah. And if they're a good person, then they should respect you anyway. And if they don't respect you, so if you do end up having that conflict that you're worried about, it kind of confirms in your mind that you were right about them, and you then have to choose your way forward. I think it's worth recognising that there's different types of boundaries, like you said. So there's the physical boundary, which is like your own personal space, unwanted contact, unwanted touch. And that's something that I struggled with in the past, where, you've been in a workplace and someone put their hand on you or their arm on you or touch your knee or whatever, and you don't like it and you don't want it, but you don't want to be the one that's then making a scene or making something uncomfortable, when the response you're going to get is, oh, I was just being friendly.
Yeah, I'm a touchy-feely person, and you go, that's okay.
That's how I am.
That's okay for you, but for me, I'm not a touchy-feely person. So please, go and touchy-feely cuddle other people if they're happy for that. But for me, just remember every time, we interact, I don't want a cuddle at the end or pat on the back or, a physical contact, because I'm me, and that's what I'm not comfortable with. So, and it's tricky, isn't it? Because a lot of people can be defensive and think you're having a go at them or whatever. But it's the delivery of how you can get it across, empathetically without. But then again, if it's a toxic person, a bad person, they're going to interpret how they want it to anyway. So,
and even if they're not, sometimes people just have to be offended and they have to get on with it and deal with it. And I'm saying this as being like someone who really did not used to set boundaries. I used to just be so bad at it, and I still find it so hard. But I know I have to do it because I've seen how things escalate, and I won't let that happen again. I think sometimes it almost takes you to have quite an extreme experience. Like I know you have in a relationship, I have in a workplace, and once you've had that extreme experience, you then stand firm in it. But I think a lot of people are just on a daily basis having these small blows of, just low level attacks that then builds up. And it does cause this anxiety and burnout and just a low mood, because you think, oh, I have to deal with that person and they're going to say this or they're going to do that. And you're going to cringe and you're going to be uncomfortable, but you don't want to say anything. And sometimes you just have to go, I'm just going to do it, and it is going to cause a conflict, and they're just going to have to be offended.
It's that pain sometimes you have to go through for, like you say, further down the line. And also, I sort of think, if you look at your life, who you're dealing with, how many people in your life, you sort of, before you see them, you're kind of preempting it or prepping for it, or you go, oh now I've got to go and see something. It's like, for me, I used to be a very yes. Oh, yes. And I would say yes to a lot of things. I'm like, why? Oh, I've done it again. I said, yeah, because I didn't want to upset the person or, for whatever reasons. And I'm like, no, my time, and maybe it's because I've got a bit older, I'm like, the time's more limited. I want to spend it with the good people rather than, I used to say yes to a lot of work. Yes, I'll do it straight away without thinking it through. And now I'm like, I'm more selective because I know it affected me a lot. And potentially the people around me as well, especially time-wise, not being there for key people, more important people.
I think we said there's different types of boundaries. So there's physical that we mentioned. You just mentioned their time and energy. That's a massive one. And all of us, I think, say yes to things just because you don't want to turn the person down. You don't want to say no, but you have to. Otherwise, you just get pulled in so many different directions.
Yeah.
And it can even be something like saying yes to going out with some friends that you just don't want to go out with anymore, but you've been friends with them for years and you don't want to say no because you don't want to be mean, but you've moved on.
Yeah.
And they drain you.
Yeah.
And you don't look forward to it. If you're not looking forward to it, and if it's not like, I just think if it's not like yes, I really want to do this, really looking forward to it, then it should, a lot of the time, it should be a no.
And also, I think looking at your life, so my life very different from 20 years ago. And it's like, we evolve, we change, different priorities. And it's like, me going out for a night out, I'm like, no, because I don't, I've never been like that anyway, but it just does. I've got so much better things to do with my time with the people I want to be with. I'm not saying, I don't value some of my friends, but that's just not me anymore. And I'm comfortable with saying, no, I'm good, thank you, but have a great night.
Other types of boundaries is emotional, so kind of limiting the negative energy that you get from toxic people. And this is a big one, because if you're spending time with people that you just don't get a good feeling of, then that is going to affect your mood and levels of anxiety as well. And I think just being able to either just not get into situations where you spend time with them, or if you do and then maybe they start complaining about something, or they start gossiping, and then you get drawn into it and you don't want to, and you just have to say, I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to talk about other people. Let's change the subject. Otherwise, you just sit there and listen to... I know what you're going to say next. You've got a good example, haven't you? Go on.
I've got a lot of this. I'm sure anyone who's listening or watching this are like, oh my gosh, yeah. It's like, for me, I don't watch certain TV programs because it's just negative. And then when I was smiling because I've got a really good mate of mine, a dear mate. He's such an awesome human being. And this was a few years ago, and I'm not going to obviously name names, but we used to go out and have a couple of pints and just have a catch up. And every time we went out, he used to talk about a certain relationship in his life. And I actually got to the point where I said to him, when I sat down and I said, mate, I'm sorry, but every time we come out, he'd say the same stuff, we go over the same stuff. I'm like, yeah, you're a great guy, you're a great friend, but please, can you either do something about that relationship, or can we not talk about it? Because it was just so negative all the time. And they say energy vampires.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he's a good human being, he's a great bloke, and I love him to bits. But just that, it was like every time, you get in, and he'd start, you go like, oh, here we go again. You're like, oh, please. I know, and if I could have helped him,
I would help people.
Yeah,
and I'm sure you're giving advice.
Yeah.
What if it was wanted and whatever, but it's hard because you've got a friend and you want to be there for your friend.
Yeah.
But there comes a point where they're just repeating the same thing over and over again. They're not changing. They're not doing anything. You have to, like you say, if it's affecting you on your energy levels, then you have to say something as well. I think once you've set a boundary, the best way to enforce it is just to live by it. So, for example, like if, let's say, your boss or work colleague is emailing you late at night and expecting you to reply late at night, and let's say you've had a conversation about this just to say, look, I can't reply at night because that's my family time, but I'll reply in the morning. You then need to not reply at night, because it's tempting then, or you need to then turn off your notifications and not get drawn into it, because quite often people set a boundary, then they'll carry on letting the person do the thing anyway. Or you'll say, like, I can't, maybe it's a family member who's criticizing you, and you have a conversation with them and say, look, I feel like this and I don't want you to make comments about me. And then they carry on doing it. You have to kind of live by what you've said, and then pull them up on it and just say, well, I'm not going to have this conversation with you now because you're doing what I asked you not to do. And I think that's a big part of it, is actually sticking by your boundaries and living by it and showing them, and walking away from, if someone's having a go at you or they're saying things, walking away from the conversation and saying things like, I will talk to you about this, but not when you're shouting at me.
Yeah.
Or I will talk to you about this, but not if you're going to criticize me.
Yeah.
And making sure that you do follow through on that.
Yeah, that's the reality and the truth, isn't it? That there might be some conflict. You know, we're not there yet where everyone accepts everybody and everyone's going to accept what you say because they're coming from their viewpoint, and they might skew that a bit. And that's what the reality I think we have to realise with setting boundaries and potentially speaking to people, that there might be pushback, and that's okay. Well, is it okay? It's kind of expected, and it's probably not okay, but it's realising that's going to be the nature of some people, and to be ready for that as well.
Yeah, I just want to finish up with a few like takeaways for people really to remember on this subject is, firstly, setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's really necessary for your own mental health and for healthy relationships around you. Boundaries aren't about pushing people away. What they actually do is filter out the people that you don't really want to be around, that aren't good for you. And just to know that some people won't respect your boundaries. And if they don't respect your boundaries, then they don't respect you. And that is really worth knowing and can help with that guilt that a lot of people feel. So, it's just something you have to just get on and do. That's what I found. You just have to do it, and you just have to feel that pain of like the awkwardness, the guilt, but feeling like I'm a bad person, should I have said this, should I not have said it, and just have to kind of stand by it and think, right, they need to respect me. If they don't respect me, then there's nothing I can do about that, but I'm not going to stick with, the behaviour that they're displaying.
It's about respecting yourself more, respecting yourself. Like I would say, the whatever that title is, that person's title, whether it's, I don't know, the boss, a loved one or whatever, take the title away and deal with the person. Because if it's a good human being, they'll treat you right. And if they're not treating you right and you highlight it, if they're a good human being, then they'll realise that and adjust accordingly. And if they don't, then psychologically, you know what you're dealing with. So in your own head, you understand, I've said that, I've made that clear. They understand that, but they're still acting this way. And you go, okay, my choices are now to remove myself away from that relationship. Or if I still have to deal with them, then I'm processing that a lot better to go, okay, toxic person doesn't respect me. I know where I stand when that communication, if we have to have that.
Yeah. So a little challenge for you is to just set one boundary this week. Think about the interactions that you have. Think about the people. Think about what drains your energy, what doesn't. Is there anything you dread doing? Anyone you don't want to talk to? Things you keep getting asked to do where you normally say yes, where you could say no. So just give that a go. And I think the thing to remember is the more you do it, the easier it becomes, and the more you'll start to feel really empowered by that. So next time we're going to look at part 3 of this series, which is about the mindset. So tune back in for that. So that's it for today's episode. If you want to join our community, we will share a link below where you can join our email newsletter, and you will get 30% off our online self-defense courses. You'll also get a free guide, 50 street safety tips you can't ignore, and then you'll get monthly self-defense tips straight to your inbox. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share it with someone and leave a review, and that will help more women stay safe. Thank you.